Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, I'd like to do two videos on Sarah Boone. Okay, Sarah Boone is the defendant in Florida who's been accused of second-degree murder, okay, for putting her husband in a suitcase and basically letting him die in a suitcase. Okay, this is like the suitcase murder, basically. It's very important to stress that this is a second-degree murder. Okay, there's no charge that this is premeditated. Even though I think most of us might have doubts that maybe it was premeditated, she's not being charged with premeditated murder. She's being charged with second degree murder. Okay, so that's very important. In any case, this case is very important because I think when you look at the interrogation and when you look at Sarah Boone's behavior when she's first dealing with the police and then in full interrogation, and then now she can't get along with any of her attorneys, and she's basically just been firing attorneys, or the attorneys have been withdrawing, and the way she's been kind of being almost like the nightmare defendant, even with the judge in this case. I think clearly, I think even a person who has no knowledge of psychology, I think anybody can see that this is a very difficult personality. Okay. And for anybody who does know a little bit about psychology, I think this is a solid cluster B personality. Okay. A solid cluster B personality. Um, I'm not prepared to say whether she fits neatly into one box or the other, whether she has more narcissistic traits or more borderline traits, or maybe more psychopathic or histrionic or antisocial, whatever. She may have a lot of, she may be like a little bit of all of each one, you know what I mean, and may not necessarily fit neatly within one box. This is the problem we had with Casey Anthony, where you couldn't get a psychologist to say that she fit neatly into one diagnosis. Okay, but she clearly has, Casey Anthony, some aspects of narcissism, some aspects of antisocial, psychopathy, whatever. And the bottom line is you can be very dangerous without fitting into one box. Okay, if you just have some traits of NPD and some traits of BPD, some traits of ASPD, some traits, whatever, maybe mix in a little bit of addictions or whatever, just with having traits and also just having fundamental immaturity, okay, you can be very dangerous. You can commit serious crimes. So I think it's going to be helpful if people could get away from this idea that if you don't fall into one box, if you're not like a full-blown NPD or a full-blown BPD, that somehow you're not in the same category. The bottom line is there's lots of different people out there, and everybody's a unique individual. Okay, and some people just have little traits of each one. Okay, and that's enough, especially if they're immature. And so I'd encourage people to think, to reflect on how, one of the big factors we don't talk about, which there's no real diagnosis for it, is just a person's maturity level. Maturity level. Okay. When a person is kind of immature combined with a few little traits of cluster B disorder or addictions, whatever, that could be by itself, that could be enough to cause a lot of problems. Okay. So I want to look at the Sarah Boone case because I don't think a person nowadays can really study cluster B disorders without looking at Sarah Boone as a serious example of what cluster B looks like in real life in many, many ways. She has just a whole bunch of behaviors, and basically she shows a kind of a combination of dishonesty, manipulation, and she's actually very good at it. She's actually very talented, I think, at manipulating and kind of dominating. She wasn't good enough to actually like fool the police. I mean, but I think I could see in real life she could probably get very far with her manipulations. Yeah, there's always going to be some percentage of people that don't buy it and they just know she's just an alcoholic and a loser. But that kind of manipulation that she shows in her interrogation, that can actually get you pretty far. Let's say in with average people. Even though half the people are going to think you're full of it. It's still effective. She doesn't give up. She's kind of a bulldog, and so I'd like to kind of look at her psychology first in terms of narcissism. And when I talk about narcissism, I kind of have a general definition, sort of like, I guess my definition of narcissism is kind of all of cluster B and maybe a little bit of addictions. I kind of find a way to sort of fit that all sort of into a kind of a subset, sort of like I don't know, it's sort of like a category that I think is very useful. It's not what I call narcissism. It may not always match with NPD exactly, but I feel like I've kind of come up with a sort of a definition of narcissism that helps me understand, behavior problems generally, especially in the context of true crime, where I don't have to look at somebody as necessarily checking all the boxes for NPD, but still falling into sort of a narcissistic type of personality. Okay, so I don't think you can study narcissism today without looking at Sarah Boone as a classic example of somebody who has a lot of narcissistic issues. And it's really you don't get to see narcissism revealed so openly very often. Because most people they kind of hide it, but because this is a very stressful situation where her partner had just been found dead in a suitcase, and she was under interrogation with cameras and everything. You can see like a whole you can see a whole rainbow of basic symptoms, that normally you wouldn't see so clearly in a conversation with somebody. So this is really revealing, and anybody who's interested in cluster B, there's a lot to learn about this case. Okay, so basically, before I talk specifically about the case, I just want to talk about how I look at narcissism. Okay, basically, I try to keep a pretty broad definition of narcissism because I think just NPD itself, that's a very specific kind of a category. And probably there's a lot of people that have narcissistic issues that don't fall into complete full-blown NPD. Okay, so the way I look at narcissism generally, and I'm saying kind of almost subclinically, not NPD, but just narcissism in general. Basically, to me, narcissism comes out of a fundamental adaptation where we are not conditioned as people, okay, to tolerate a lot of discomfort in life. Okay, discomfort in terms of uncomfortable thoughts, uncomfortable situations, like really addressing uncomfortable situations, kind of taking to heart sort of circumstances that are very unpleasant, very uncomfortable, very challenging, very dissonant. Okay, and where we sort of fall into a preference for sort of always sliding into more comfortable ways of thinking and sort of avoiding irritating and discomfort ways of thinking. Okay, so basically the fundamental thing I see in narcissism is just an innate sort of deep-seated sort of lack of tolerance and lack of experience and sort of an avoidance of discomfort, especially psychological discomfort. Okay, so if that becomes pervasive enough, okay, a person will sort of mechanically and automatically just kind of sort of move away from any thoughts or ideas or assessments in life that sort of implicate anything uncomfortable, okay? And sort of always preferring ways of thinking and sort of assessments of situations where everything is just seen in a more comfortable way, okay? And so that can start to form that sort of narcissistic disturbance where you start to sort of only prefer information that sort of makes you in a better light. Sort of you sort of filter information and sort of only consider information that sort of casts you in a better light. And you don't really mind when other people are cast in a bad light because that sort of elevates you as a person. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like it has a way of sort of organically kind of producing this effect where you're sort of filtering information and sort of filtering the way you think about things so that you feel elevated and other people are relatively down, which also makes a person feel elevated. So that's kind of a basic narcissistic profile. And I think more generally, we could just say, leaving aside that issue of whether I'm elevated or whether other people are put down, you could even say it's in the same family, and we could even define like a broader narcissistic category to just be becoming habituated. When a person becomes habituated to just not tolerating a lot of uncomfortable subject matter and addressing the issues of one's life where you're taking to heart the uncomfortable feelings associated with any sort of like real life situations. Okay, so life is full of situations. Okay, and whether it's social or just in the family or just tedious stuff, just doing homework when you're a kid, having to do your spelling homework, being frustrated because they're making you do homework that's too boring or whatever. In life, there's all kinds of things that are uncomfortable. And some people have more of a tolerance to sort of carry uncomfortable feelings. And other people, they have a way of kind of avoiding discomfort almost in a pathological way, where it becomes too much of a pattern and it starts to really eventually create behavior problems. Okay. because one of the main discomforts that comes in life is our behavioral regulation. Okay, the part of us that sort of interferes when we were about to enjoy something. Okay, or when we're about to have fun or whatever, and something interferes and says, should I really be doing this? And that's kind of like an irritation, because it's sort of like an interference. It puts like friction into the situation. And if you're very, very averse, if you're very, very resistant and very, let's say, intolerant of frustration, okay, even just the slightest interference of just your conscience kind of stepping in to say, hey, should I really do that? Maybe I should go home early. I need to sleep. If you really don't tolerate frustration at all, that's going to impair that part of your mind that could come in to interfere when you're about to do something impulsive. Okay. And so that can result in behavior problems. So it's not just a narcissism in terms of you prefer to see yourself elevated, you prefer to see other people down, so that makes you feel elevated. It also gets into the discomforts involved in regulating your own behavior. Okay, so you're not really welcoming the parts of your mind and the ways of thinking that might put second thoughts on a behavior, because that'll interfere and that'll cause a frustration. Okay, so basically, in the worst case, it can produce sort of like antisocial in the sense of behavior regulation, where you're going to end up doing things even though your better conscience would say, hey, that's going to affect other people, but oh, that's a pain in the ass to have to think about other people. So you don't tolerate the pain in the ass of having to consider others and consider this and that. So you end up just doing things. Okay, so basically, the way I look at narcissism is basically it's a fundamental sort of a intolerance of just the normal sort of discomforts and frustrations that could allow for a healthy way of looking at the world and a healthy way of behaving in the world. Okay, so basically, the way I look at narcissism is a fundamental narcissistic problem. That lack of tolerance of frustration, that's going to result in both the arrogance and the kind of snooty, kind of weird, almost cartoonish kind of haughtiness that narcissistic people have, and sort of putting others down, and also behavior issues, which is kind of more on the scale of, let's say, antisocial, or just criminal, just committing petty crimes, or just having a behavior problem. And related to that could also be anger management. When you get upset, you end up acting out because you just can't tolerate the throwing into the mix a little bit of friction, a little bit of control. That's just too frustrating. So you end up just going with your momentum. Okay, so narcissistic problems can result, I think, in a whole spectrum of issues related to behavior and attitude. Okay, there's nothing more obvious than when a person has a narcissistic attitude, but what we don't realize is that the base of it is issues with tolerating frustration. That's my belief. Okay, so then let's look at this Sarah Boone. Okay, so basically, what happened is that she apparently, okay, and I'm getting this from an interview with her ex-husband, her old ex-husband, okay, who basically confirmed that she's a chronic alcoholic and she has terrible behavioral control. In other words, he couldn't stay married to her because she just couldn't control her behavior. She just takes a little bit of alcohol and then she just can't control herself. She ends up staying up till 3 a.m. and having strange men come over to the house. And it's just almost like complete lack of behavioral control. Okay. And so, having seen basically the interview and the interrogation with Sarah Boone, I can just tell from just the way she fidgets, and she's so uncomfortable. Oh, I need more water. I need my cigarettes, blah, blah, blah. And she's so fussy, and she's so irritated at weird questions that she doesn't agree with. And that, to me, I think is a perfect portrait, almost a classic portrait of a person who has almost a childlike, even children sometimes have better tolerance, where even for a child, she has a very deficient tolerance, a lack of tolerance of frustration and irritation. Okay. Things that would challenge her, things that would weigh on her, things that would sort of tax her, whatever. She's just too irritable to tolerate, the normal taxation of having a conscience and just, being a person and just living with the normal discomforts that make for a stable personality. Okay, so clearly she has that total intolerance of irritation and discomfort. Okay, so that to me is right there a major question whether she has a fundamental narcissistic issue, and I think she does. Okay, so basically, let's just kind of go over basically what happened. So The background is that she has kind of obviously a behavior problem. Okay, alcohol abuse, whether or not she's alcoholic, she probably is alcoholic, but maybe the fundamental pathology underlying her alcohol abuse is just that impulse control. So she may be a case where the alcoholism shows up as a symptom of a narcissistic problem. Okay, whereas other people, they may start with alcoholism and develop narcissistic characteristics. I have a funny feeling that Sarah Boone probably started with narcissistic issues in terms of her lack of ability to control her behavior due to her lack of tolerance of irritation and frustration. Okay. So basically, I think her alcoholism probably grew out of, I'm guessing that kind of narcissistic personality that she's got. And I'm saying a narcissism not as NPD, but it's just broader narcissism. Okay. So, so basically, she's had like say she got divorced. Apparently, she has kind of an unstable life, and she's hanging out with a pretty. I'm sorry, this guy that ended up dead. He looks like a pretty kind of a sketchy kind of guy. So she herself is living kind of a sketchy life, and she's in a relationship with a person who's also kind of sketchy. Apparently, they've had some major alcohol abuse problems together, and also like some domestic violence issues together. Okay, so she's kind of living a pretty, I would say, a pretty low functioning life. Okay, pretty low functioning, probably drinking way too much, and probably involved in sort of an unstable interpersonal life with her partner, the person who was killed. Okay, so so one night they're together. She's with her partner in their apartment, and according to her, they're playing a game, and they're playing hide and seek, and he's going to go into the suitcase, and she closes the suitcase, and then voila, it ends up downstairs, and he's in a weird position, and he's saying, he's saying, Sarah, I can't breathe, get me out of here, whatever. And then she starts saying, fuck you, and saying like, that's the way I feel when you cheat on me, and blah, blah, blah. And just basically really being extremely cruel, and just leaving him in that suitcase. And apparently she made a couple of videos on her phone, and it went over like a half hour time span or something, or like a 20 or 30-minute time span. And she just leaves him there, and it's clear that he's in distress. Okay. And now her explanation is that, I think he's just the boy who cried wolf. He's acting that way. I'm not taking him seriously. And so then she just sort of forgets about him, according to her. She goes up and falls asleep, and the next morning finds him dead in the suitcase. Okay. Now, it may be that if we know the full truth, it may be that she actually premeditated the murder. Okay. But the state of Florida is very smart. Okay. I think they're very smart. They're only charging her with second degree. Okay. And I think they learned their lesson, or at least I hope they learned their lesson, because in the Casey Anthony case, I think that was exactly why Casey Anthony got off in her murder case, because they tried so hard to get first degree murder. Okay. And what they probably should have done in the Casey Anthony is maybe gone for second or third degree murder, or even manslaughter. Okay, that probably would have been much smarter, just given the circumstances. Sometimes when the prosecutors overcharge a case, sometimes you set yourself up to actually have a harder time proving, and you make it easier for the defendant to show reasonable doubt, or at least give the impression of reasonable doubt. So in this case, Florida is, even though she may have premeditated, okay, they're only charging her with second degree, which does not require them to prove any premeditation. Okay, so whether or not there was premeditation, only Sarah will know, or maybe she won't even know. Maybe she's so dissociated from her own motives that she may not even know. But the bottom line is that we'll never really know whether she intended to kill him. Okay, but she's definitely been charged with having her partner in an imminently dangerous situation, of being in the suitcase, and then having a disregard for his life by not taking the appropriate action to address his danger. Okay, so basically just leaving him there. You can argue, and I think I believe this, I think it was a disregard for his life, just to leave him in that suitcase when he was telling her that he was in distress. Okay, now what's even probably more damning in this case is that I don't know that it's come out yet, but I think that when they analyze, like say, maybe they took did an analysis of the carpet, or maybe an analysis of the stairs, analysis of the body on autopsy, and looking at the injuries and just the configuration of the suitcase, they may be able through forensics to actually prove that he was thrown down the stairs in the suitcase, and that would really add to the second degree, because that would really add to the disregard for the human life, and also for doing things that were imminently dangerous to his life. Okay, so I think this is a very solid case for second degree murder, and I think this is a much smarter strategy than what they used in the Casey Anthony case, where I think they overcharged it as murder one. And I think this case, on the other hand, with Sarah Boone, I think they're properly charging it as murder two, okay, second degree murder. Um, so basically, yeah, the background is, basically according to Sarah, they were playing a game, hide and seek. He agreed to get into the suitcase. It was all fun and games, and then suddenly there's a video showing him in a really weird position on the ground where he's begging for help, and she's telling him "fuck you" and "this is how I feel," and basically doesn't give a shit. So you see a side of her, and I don't think she expected the police to find that video, by the way. You see a side of Sarah Boone that's totally different from the way she wants to come across in her interrogation, okay, where she is just vicious and mean, I mean, really, really callous, super callous. And yet in other situations, she tries to come across as like very competent and very reasonable, and not like I'm like not a bad person or whatever. And I think we can see that this is a person who has a lot of facets, and she's trying to sort of conceal or represent herself one way, and then in another moment she really shows that she's something totally different, and potentially really in the right circumstance she could really cause harm to somebody. So I have no trouble. I can't say whether she's NPD. I mean, nobody can say that, because I mean, NPD is such a specific diagnosis, and I don't even know if she checks all the boxes for BPD either, borderline. I don't know that. I think more than likely, in all honesty, if you were to do like a true psychological assessment of Sarah Boone, I think you would find elements of alcohol abuse disorder. I think you would find elements of narcissism or NPD, and then elements of BPD, and then maybe even elements of antisocial, just elements. But the bottom line is that I think her fundamental problem is narcissistic, and that she shows a profound and alarming inability to tolerate even the most minor frustration. And she seems to have a striking um, lack of control in her behavior, especially when alcohol is involved. Okay, so I think this is one of those classic cases where you've got a cluster B pathology sort of aggravated by alcohol use, problematic alcohol use. And, this most striking thing for me is just her obvious intolerance for irritation, and her obvious extreme lack of behavioral control. So she has a very low behavioral regulation. And it's just amazing how the narcissistic symptoms just show up like in full glory, like how she tries to make herself look good. She tries to make herself look like she's an exceptional person. She's an outstanding person. She tries to make herself look like she's in control of everybody, and she's just kind of like kind of snobby, kind of arrogant, and that's very classic narcissism. And so, yeah, I mean, now in this first video, I just kind of want to lay out the basic presentation of her personality. I think, it's clear that her issues are narcissistic, or at least in the family of the narcissistic family of personality disorders, and that she has, a lot of behavioral regulation issues, and that she does display some clear narcissistic features, basically. So in the next video, I want to kind of get a little more into, the actual features that she shows in the interrogation, how she's so good at arguing. And she has this way of kind of like using kind of like arrogance and putting people down and sort of challenging people and sort of acting like she's in control, so that she really is using, I think she is using very effective techniques of manipulation. And I think how would I say, I think we should take a careful look at what those really are. Those, like say, those powers that people have, to argue, to put people down, to sort of manipulate people, whatever. I think those deserve to be called powers. I think there's a lot of intelligence behind those things, and I think it'll almost be better for us if we look at those as like talents and not so much as symptoms. Okay, because um, she does have a talent really for the way she uses her language, the way she kind of manipulates the officers and kind of sort of presents the situation. I think I've even met lawyers that are not so good at sort of framing things and manipulating the presentation of an issue. So she's very effective, and she's a very talented person at arguing. um, Even if she may not fool, let's say, the majority of policemen, I still think she's got a talent. And I think we need to come face to face and be honest that when cluster B shows up in people, it's often a combination of talents and pathology. It's not just pathology. It's sort of I think cluster B disorders is sort of a combination of talents and pathology. It's sort of like talents in a pathological person, pathological personality. So um, in my opinion, I think a lot of what she does deserves to be called witchcraft, because I think witchcraft is really the reason I say witchcraft is that I think we inherit these talents, I think, from thousands and thousands of years. And I think these talents basically are part of the way we influence other people, our persuasiveness, the way we influence other people. And I think these talents, they come from so far back in the generations that I think it's almost useful to say that they are the witchcraft of our personality, and they are talents. But when a person is very immature, those things sort of take on a life of their own, and they sort of take over the person, and we don't really have control over them. So I would like to encourage people to think that we have a lot of, like, say, components in our personality that sort of have an intelligence of their own, like the ability to manipulate, the ability to sort of like turn the tables and change the way we look at a problem, and to sort of convince other people and to be persuasive. Those are talents. And I think we shouldn't mistake those talents for wisdom or for like a general, like, larger intelligence. These are kind of like satellite intelligences, basically. And I think that when we don't have that core maturity, okay, those satellite intelligence, they kind of operate sort of almost autonomously. And we don't want to mistake the fact that a person has a lot of talent or like a lot of witchcraft. We don't want to mistake that for believing that they have a lot of core integrity or core wisdom. Okay. So if we want to talk about like the whole, like, full intelligence of a person, the full competency of a person, it's not just how intelligent one satellite aspect of their personality is. It's whether they have an integrated core, like a core competence, which can only come through conditioning and living a life where you can tolerate frustration and tolerate difficulty. You know what I mean? And so I think we need to be able to admit that a person can have, like, say, elemental intelligence or elemental talent and still question whether they have competence as a person, because the core, sort of like the executive center of a person, is much more than just the satellite talents that we have. And I think it'll be very useful to sort of examine Sarah Boone from the point of view of what I think of as witchcraft elements, you know, and kind of look at what's missing. She has a lot of talents, but she has something central that is missing. And it's too simple to say, well, she just doesn't have a soul. It's not. That's too simple. That's not a very careful statement. I think it's more accurate to say that she doesn't have a central integration. Okay. And she doesn't have a central executive, she hasn't developed a central executive personhood, which I think is really the source of true competency in people. And so I encourage people to consider that you can have very talented elements and still not really be a person with full competency. You can still have diminished capacity, I think, psychologically, even if you do have talent. And even if you're effective in your manipulation. So, this is a very important case, and I think we have a lot to learn from it. So I look forward to making the second video on this, and thanks for watching.